Hello everyone. In the previous video, we looked at the Gospels. In this video, we will move a step closer to revealing the possible identity of the historical Christ. That is, someone with the persona that we today in the 21st century would imagine to be a Christ-like figure. Now, gospel means God spell, or I would propose ghost spell, which seems to imply that the gospel is in written form was once seen as a sacred object. It would have been sacred merely to possess a copy as it is today. Back in the day, owning a written copy of any gospel would be like owning an iPhone. Dinner parties would touch on the topic of sacred information, and the host would proudly announce that he had a secret and pull out a gospel to impress the guests. The Gospels are generally either the form of a few sayings of Jesus, as in the apocryphal Gospels. These would have been sold in antique stores, even in Roman times, as purported documents. That is probably where the Gospels come from. They were written up and then they were sold. Who knows who wrote them? Or they would have taken the form of a biography rather than religious texts of sayings. And this is obviously going to shock some people. Also, look at Jesus' parables and teachings. A lot of them don't seem to make any sense at all, and one wonders what the lesson was even after reading them. This could imply there was mistranslation from either text or idea. You see, if you're copying a document over and over and over, you copy what sells. You don't necessarily copy what makes sense. You also try to summarize. You don't want to be writing too much. And you see, the originals are all in Greek, yet Jesus is said to have been Aramaic, which is basically Aramira. This is not strictly Semitic, but it's actually Hamitic or Hamito-Semitic, today known as Afro-Asiatic. It does imply a North African component to the language he was speaking. I think these Hamites were ancient Europeans originally, as they put the verb last, like the Latins. These were pre-Arabs. All of North Africa spoke Hamitic, and so did the East. And they had the old European way of talking as well. The Egyptians and Welsh, they do the same, putting the verb last, as do the current tribes of the Tafnic, the Amazigh, and others. Hamitic people, as we understand them, are the pre-Arabic component of North Africa. Today, however, they are Semitic with a trace of North African origin. Basically, Hamitic is a form of Phoenician, the language of the Carthaginian seafaring traders, possibly with a hint of ancient Egypt, which is also a Hamitic language. This is what we might understand when we say that Jesus spoke Aramaic, because to simply say he spoke Aramaic is to explain nothing at all. It would imply loosely that he was a Syrian or Assyrian. So again, what's going on? Now, which gospel was first? Well, I've seen some good arguments that it may have been John, even though that gospel is lengthy and more wordy than the others. But scholars generally say it was Mark, with Matthew being a little more Jewish in character. But to be honest, they are all basically the same. I think to say that Matthew is more Jewish than the other ones is almost ridiculous. Trying to pull them apart, hoping one might be older than the other, is like checking the used-by date on the same batch of cans of soup. They say Mark is earlier, as it's simpler and less embellished. I think this is for purposes of mass consumption, rather than a sign of antiquity, and scholars are possibly misled. To be perfectly honest, I don't think any of them is an early gospel. I think they are all, at least geographically, very distant from the heartland of the religion and were finalized in the 3rd century. If they were 1st century written in Judea, as some current scholars claim, they would contain way more detail. As they stand, they seem more like stories written from storytellers who didn't wish to bore audiences with mere detail, or had forgotten political events and contextual information, or had never learnt it to begin with. In other words, this was written down from an oral tradition which had already possibly lost a lot of original content. I say this because many of the political events as described in the New Testament never ever occurred in comparison with historical sources, and it is as simple as that. For historical events, we can point to Pontius Pilate and the destruction of the temple and the entry of a Messiah into Jerusalem to great acclaim. This the New Testament records, and Josephus actually mentions these events. But if we follow this trail, it actually points to messiahs and prophets recorded by Josephus who are similar to Jesus, but not quite the same guy as specified in the New Testament, and this will be demonstrated. Think about it. I've never seen a satisfying explanation for why the early Christians were persecuted so dreadfully by the Romans. According to early sources, they were all saintly, killed by the Romans, the evil Romans, because they were pious and heaven-bound. Does that make any sense to you? Where are the sources with the actual reasons? Well, they conveniently no longer exist. I think that all the sources mentioning the actual trials and real reasons and all sorts of things have been edited in later times. Early Christians were persecuted and demonized by Rome, their religion treated as dangerous to the empire, even if other religions were tolerated. Early Christians basically thought the world was going to end in their lifetime and Christ would return. Just speculation, but surely even a few of them took steps to try and make the world end in their own time. That is why I believe they were persecuted. Early Christians would have been meeting regularly in secret for the coming revolution or apocalypse or whatever they thought was going to occur. They would have been having Last Supper after Last Supper. So imagine trying to hold a public meeting saying the world was going to end. The Romans probably would not allow such a thing and would have frowned upon such gatherings as fomenting conspiracy, discontent, and obvious rebellion. Yet, by the 300s AD, we are now confronted with a world where Christianity is not just accepted but institutionalized. It is now part of the political system. Land-owning bishops are now part of the feudal system, collecting taxes, who presumably would not want the world to have ended. What happened? Well, it all comes down to the Sun religion, which must have played a key role. It clearly amalgamated with Christianity. Its worshippers did not just vanish off the face of the earth. Simply, generation by generation, they became more Christian. You see, when you build a building, you need a foundation first. If you want an idea to spread, people must first be receptive to that idea, or they will never listen. Does anyone ever listen to you when they are not first respectful of you and therefore receptive to what you have to say? You see, this is why Christianity had a big problem in spreading around. How did it spread? You don't just go up to someone and say, hey, this guy died during some rebellion in the East, let's worship him. How did they sell this idea to the Romans? I suppose people were taken aside and told, hey, do you want eternal life? I can share a secret with you. But is that the only way it spread? Christianity, in its extreme millennial end of the world is coming form, was a lot different to what the Romans had become accustomed to. In fact, the Romans must have thought they could use Christianity if they controlled it. Be good, and you'll go to heaven. The foundation for the spread of Christianity, the substratum, was the spread from Syria, that is Phoenicia, home of the Aramaic language, of the Sun religion. I think we can be sure of this. The Sun religion arose out of Syria, quickly conquering the Roman world. I presume because Phoenicians were travelling everywhere in ships. Ironically, the sun is also Baal, or Lord. How ironic is that? The world moves not always entropically, but into the direction of irony. Rome conquered Carthage and destroyed their religion, but they were in turn reconquered by a future variation of the Carthage religion centuries later. It's like that old magic law. Two objects, once touching, are always touching. I was on a tour in UK and came across this weird thing at the entrance to a small chapel in the Cotswolds in the village of Lecoq. Is it the sun god? Is it an early Christ? I've seen lots of Apollos in Christian churches and cathedrals in Europe, but you have to go down into the crypt. Then you get to look at the stuff they are hiding and don't know what to do with. Ruins of the Dark Ages church, which preceded the current structure. You see, all kinds of weird statues in such crypts which speak of Christianity originating out of solar and other pagan religions. Let me tell you the major reason why early Christianity was not permitted to reflect later Roman Christianity. Here is one. No one mentions this as a reason for the persecutions. The Jewish-Roman War, which lasted 4 years, 66 to 70 AD, the Kittos War, named after the Roman general Lucius Quietus in 115 to 117. In this war, the entire East went up in revolt. As a consequence, Jewish communities thought responsible were uprooted from everywhere and relocated to Judea. This was fomented by Jewish zealots, or were they Christians? Is history even permitted to tell us the answer? It seems not. Then we had another war, the Bar Kokhba Revolt, which seems to have been the worst war of the three. It permanently weakened the empire, and it was the reason Rome gave up any further expansion under Hadrian. The reason the 9th Legion supposedly vanished in this time, I think, is that troops had to be transferred all over the place. Is it the actual reason why Hadrian reversed Trajan's policy of endless expansion? I mean, it's not just because he suddenly woke up one day and decided Rome was big enough, as the TV documentaries used to say. It's because he didn't have a choice. There weren't enough troops left. They all died in the wars in the East. You see, the Romans had enough on their plate, trying to just hold on to what their predecessors had built in more peaceful times. The Romans fielded 6 regular legions and 6 auxiliary legions to obliterate this threat from the east once and for all. They decimated the landscape. The Romans recorded one figure of 580,000 Jews who perished in this time. Rome decided that Judea should no longer be Jewish as a result. All Jews were expelled, and most never saw their temple in Jerusalem ever again. They started wandering all over the place and were accepted, perhaps leaving the empire migrating to Khazaria or Kazakhstan. I think Khazaria was already Jewish, mainly as a result of these wars. They just had to get out of the empire. These 3 wars are instrumental to the development of Christianity, yet they are generally ignored by biblical scholars. I mean, were the war makers deliberately trying to bring about an end of the world, thus forcing Christ or some Messiah to return? For Rome, it was an enormous task, like the Hamites of Carthage rising their head again and needing to be crushed over and over. As it was that same old religion they had to deal with yet again. I bet civilians simply escaped to other parts of the empire, not only spreading Judaism, but also spreading Christianity with them. I mean, 3 times after 3 major wars, imagine all the refugees pouring all over the place. This was how Christianity spread. Well, one of the ways. It was the old empire of the East trying to re-establish itself. That is, the old Greco empire, the old empire of the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians. It was the same empire over and over with different masters. You see, in the East, they had a huge population and they thought, well, why not? We've got the pedigree, not this upstart Rome, upstart Italy, but us. But this last war was a partisan war. It was ferocious. A Roman version of World War II in terms of its size. I noticed that Bar Kokhba's army comprised local militias, Samaritan youth bands, as well as regulars known as the Guard. The inclusion of the Samaritans, the other type of Judaism, mountain worship, similar to pyramid worship, would imply to me that actually most Jewish sects would have participated, even if they didn't believe in the temple and they were at war with each other. So why not Christians? Of course, that fact would have been deeply inconvenient for later Roman Christians, would it not? Christians in history at war with their forefathers? It would not be easy to simply forget. Would it not be easy to simply forget, erase this painful idea? For the next 200 years, there was no Jerusalem. The temple was ploughed up and the city was rebuilt as Aelia Capitolina, and Jupiter was made chief god. Yet a century and a half or so later, the entire empire has been largely converted to one of the religions of Judea. What on earth happened? Well, I think the Phoenicians also helped them out. They spread their solar Baal religion first. Heck, they spread this religion to America, and I think working with the Romans. I bet St. Christopher was one of these early evangelizers. The Phoenicians, or Syrians as we call them today, had already spread considerably. The tribe in Peru at Lake Titicaca near Tiwanaku is actually called Aymara, something picked up on by Thor Heyerdahl, a link with the old world. It kind of proves with other information. The Phoenicians did reach Tiwanaku and settle there. Perhaps they were mining the Potosi silver and gold mines. This is one mine that funded Spain for centuries and helped fund the Phoenicians under their king Solomon, for Solomon is probably a Phoenician, Assyrian ruler, not a Jewish ruler. You see, they say Solomon never existed. Wrong! He was just in Assyria, not Judea. Or not necessarily Judea. You see, Judea was probably part of Assyria. I think his name was probably Shalmaneser. There were 5 Shalmanesers or Solomons between the 1200s and 700 BC, which is just the time we are looking for. These were powerful figures whose ships possibly reached the New World. So who dares claim that Solomon never existed when we have all these figures as clear as day in history? Assyria was northern Iraq, but extended to the coast. Phoenicia, known as the Fertile Crescent. The crescent is one of the reasons the moon was worshipped and is still seen on Eastern flags. The moon was probably one of Solomon's gods. You see, the moon was a religion of the Neanderthals who were based in Asia. According to the late great thinker Stan Gooch, the crescent on the Soviet flag shows Neanderthal hybrids. Was worshipped by Neanderthal hybrids, more prolific in Asia than Europe, subconsciously adopting the old worship of the East, being inheritors of this ancient ritual, this ancient Neanderthal mystic religion. Meanwhile, the sun worshippers of Germany, who were the tall Cro-Magnons, had always worshipped the sun by comparison. World War II is thus a subconscious energetic battle between two competing mind ideas of regeneration and life. It was a war waged for survival between a subconscious lower level of our minds, which is often the case and the reason why we usually do not know why we are fighting wars in the first place, other than that the enemy supposedly is more evil than we are. We have Germany and Japan with their sun flag religions, their monotheism based around a powerful leader, based on ancient Rome's sun religion, and then the Soviet Union and USA on the other side, natural allies because they represented the moon and stars, based instead on systems and concepts and alignments, more and subterfuge and subtleties, rather than the expansive, conquering, almighty sun power as their inspiration. The Axis powers had a philosophy of rapid conquest, everything all at once, spreading across the map like some cosmic Big Bang idea. The Soviets and USA, who already had unlimited resources and the empires that the Axis craved, concentrated on strategy and timing. They waited for the time and place for certain offensives and had the sheer luxury of not having their military decisions based upon a need to acquire resources and land in a particular location. As with the astrologer, time was on their side and the stars needed to be aligned. The moon and stars are what astrology is all about, and their home, or one of them, was the Fertile Crescent. We have alchemy from Egypt, but astrology is from the East. Now, since Judea was certainly a tributary state of the greater Assyrian Empire, home of astrology, Solomon was their king too. Archaeology doesn't take this obvious solution because the people who study Judea do not look at Assyria. In fact, the whole Old Testament, and not to mention much of the New Testament, might be based in Syria, but only becoming associated later on with a particular prophet located in Judea and the trouble around the temple. I mean, why wouldn't this man travel around right throughout the Aramaic-speaking empire, which was all of Syria, all of Assyria? I mean, could this be why biblical history and biblical archaeology never seem to match? I mean, they're looking at different countries. I mean, simply look to Syria and Assyria. The entire region is completely ignored by biblical scholars. I think the temple of Kalasasaya at Tiwanaku is a church or temple built in Peru by Roman Phoenician evangelizers who are halfway between the sun religion of Sol Invictus and Christianity as we know it today. Look at the gate of the sun. Look at any old church. It faces east, but often faces exactly to the rising sun. Well, churches have gates of the sun too. In Ireland, in wonderful Glendalough, and I've mentioned this before, there are ruins which date from the Dark Ages, but I don't know if they are exactly Christian ruins. I exited one gate and noticed the sun shining directly in my face close to the solstice. I started renaming everything: Gate of the Sun, Gate of the Solstice, Temple of the Sun, Temple of the Moon, as I noticed that you could name each of the possible 9 churches there. They say there are 7, but there are actually 9. They're after different astronomical phenomena. I mean, each church ruin there is dedicated to a different astronomical phenomena, but few or no one has noticed this. If you don't go with a regular tour, which go in and out and barely see 10% of what the place has to offer, but actually stay there. You have to stay there for at least 3 days. You need the dawns and sunsets in order to have the ruins for yourself. There is so much to see and discover. I mean, look at the great temple at Baalbek, one of the Roman Empire's greatest temples. And surely this was built for the Syrian gods, for early Christianity. I mean, it's ignored. Was this the original Holy Land of the Empire, seat of the sun religion? From here, Phoenicians, retaining the old knowledge, travelled out to the New World. Spanish contains a lot of words which are taken direct from Latin, and you might not know this, but if you look at the languages, Spanish, I think, is a lot closer to Latin than Italian is. It's very close. I bet the Americans consulted their old texts, comparing the Spanish and Latin languages, and stated that these conquistadors were returning Viracocha, as they spoke one and the same lingo. But we will never know. Guys, thanks for watching. In the next video, we look to the Roman Emperor Elagabalus, father of the sun cult in Rome. He brought the cult over from Syria to Rome itself. It was the next step, and the next step in our joint journey before revealing potentially the historical Christ. Thank you very much.